Good morning.
All right, Nirvana, the waterfall. Wow, what a wonderful name for a chapter. I saw some nice waterfalls yesterday, actually. I think part of my ideal in Vedanta is that sadhu that just stood in front of the waterfall all day long, seeing it for the first time over and over and over again. Ah, how beautiful. Oh, mother, how beautiful. Just to stand there and always renew it. That's part of the practice of the presence, because you have to constantly accept the newness. Actually, one of the things that this sage that wrote this book, The Silence of the Mind, Ili Chiara. If anybody ever learns how to pronounce that, please let me know. But he in there says that the living in the moment demands meeting the moment with the same freshness that the moment meets you with. Hello, Tunga. Good morning. And so
Good morning.
Good morning indeed. So having that constant newness of life, not dragging in any of the meaningless past or the meaningless future, but seeing the moment each time as fresh, free, infinite, and pure potential, and what fills that potential is not the desire or the will of the ego. To have a will is to have an ego, ironically. So we meet it egolessly, and we react by just simply letting our nature, letting the world mind, the universal mind, the big mind, give us the impetus for action rather than the ego desiring making an action. So anyway, what's he saying? All right, so we'll jump in to Nirvana, the waterfall, Zen mind, beginner's mind. And his little catchphrase this morning: our life and death are the same thing. All right. Jan, what does that mean? Perfect. See, Jan is a knower. Yes, our life and death are the same thing. When we realize this fact, we have no fear of death anymore, nor actual difficulty in our life. That's an interesting statement. Let's see where it comes from. If you go to Japan and visit, oh my goodness, Aihaiji Monastery, just before you enter, you will see a small bridge called Hanshaku Kyo, which means Half Dipper Bridge. Whenever Dogen Zenji dipped water from the river, he used only a dipper full, returning the rest to the river again without throwing it away. That is why we call the bridge Hanshaku Kyo, Half Dipper Bridge. At Aihaiji, when we wash our face, we fill the basin to just 70% of its capacity. And after we wash, we empty the water toward rather than away from the body. This expresses respect for the water. This kind of practice is not based on any idea of being economical. It may be difficult to understand why Dogen returned half of the water he dipped to the river. This kind of practice is beyond our thinking. When we feel the beauty of the river, when we are one with the water, we intuitively do it in the Dogen's way. It is our true nature to do so. But if your true nature is covered by ideas of economy or efficiency, Dogen's way makes no sense. This is part of what the discovery is in this practice of the presence, or the practice of mindfulness, or being in the moment, or when you still your mind, stop your thought, which is the same as relinquishing your ego, or surrendering your ego, surrendering yourself. Because the ego, as we've talked about, is that thing that causes us to feel separate, causes us to feel independent. And the signs of the ego are exactly that. The signs of the ego are separation. The signs of the ego are drive rather than inspiration. The signs of the ego are will, you know, tiredness comes from ego, all of this exertion of this lower self. And this believing that you know is part of the ego also, believing that you know something, knowing anything. Because our knowledge is just based on an arrangement of relative thoughts. And so our knowledge is always relative, which means it's not always true. And anytime that it is true, it's only true under certain conditions. And so what he's talking about is a real connection with the world around us, you know, so that we don't treat people nicely because we're polite. We treat people nicely because we know ourselves in that person. We have that shared identity. That removal of ego has made us one. And so we don't recycle things because it's the right thing to do or because we want to be good citizens. We recycle because we've lost our ego. And we've seen a oneness in the way that we respect the presence of God in all things, right? And so that sense of honor, that sense of worship becomes dominant in us in the way that we live. And that's what he's talking about here. So that we, you know, in this act of efficiency that he's talking about, we don't do it because it's efficient. Who cares about efficiency? That's an egoistic term that takes into account relative thinking. You know, we do it because it's our nature to do it, because it's our nature to be respectful and to love and to be responsible. You know, in the same way that the sage who had the scorpion biting him every time he saved it from the water. To any onlooker who wasn't doing a practice watching that, the sage is a nut. What a crazy guy. How ridiculous to keep picking that rescuing that scorpion from the water only to be stung again. But he didn't take that into account. That's relative knowledge. That's relative between him and the scorpion. He didn't think in those terms. He saw himself in the scorpion. He knows his nature to be love, to be wisdom and existence. And so in the combination of those three, there is action. He doesn't act. For us to act, if we act from ego space, is a relative action. But to act from the space of nature, from what we are, is to be one with universal mind. It's to be in step, in harmony with the divine will, with the divine isness, as it were. And so this is what he's talking about here, that he doesn't save his half a glass of water out of a sense of economy or efficiency. You know, he doesn't dump the water toward the body for any sense of economy or efficiency. He does it out of respect. And respect and worship are very closely interlinked. So living a life of surrender to the universal mind, which means you've not reserved your local mind for your own thoughts. Your mind is silent when it's not being employed consciously. That when we're in that state of silence, that's when we are able to hear the universal mind, when we're able to sense the inner movement toward action from a divine principle, and not from a desire or a calculation of mind or ego. He goes on, he says, I went to Yosemite National Park and I saw some huge waterfalls. The highest one was 1,340 feet high, and from it the water comes down like a curtain thrown from the top of the mountain. It does not seem to come down swiftly as you might expect. It seems to come down very slowly because of the distance. And the water does not come down as one stream, but it is separated into many tiny streams. From a distance, it looks like a curtain. And I thought it must be a very difficult experience for each drop of water to come down from the top of such a height of the mountain. It takes time, you know, a long time, for the water to finally reach the bottom of the waterfall. And it seems to me that our human life may be like this. We have many difficult experiences in our life. But at the same time, I thought, the water was not originally separated, but was one with the whole river. Only when it is separated does it have some difficulty in falling. It is as if the water does not have any feeling when it is one whole river. Only when separated into many drops can it begin to have or express some feeling. When we see one whole river, we do not feel the living activity of the water. But when we dip a part of the water into a dipper, we experience some feeling of the water, and we also feel the value of the person who uses the water. Feeling ourselves and the water in this way, we cannot use it in just a material way. It is a living thing. Before we were born, we had no feeling. We were one with the universe. This is called mind only, or essence of mind, or big mind. After we are separated by birth from this oneness, as the water falling from the waterfall is separated by the wind and rocks, then we have a feeling. You have difficulty because you have feeling. You attach to the feeling you have without knowing just how this kind of feeling is created. When you do not realize that you are one with the river or one with the universe, you have fear. Whether it is separated into drops or not, water is water. Our life and death are the same thing. When we realize this fact, we have no fear of death anymore, and we have no actual difficulty in our life. Right. All right. So when we have this notion of oneness, and that notion of oneness is very closely linked to the silence of the egoistic mind, to the silence of the local mind. When we have this flow, when you're in the flow, meaning that you're not exercising egoistic desires or egoistic perspectives, which egoism is really just the practice of having a perspective, having an opinion, having an idea. Those are all signs of egoism. Right and wrong is a fruit of egoism. And actually, egoism is the fruit of the tree that was in the Garden of Eden, the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil. Having the knowledge of good and evil, having the knowledge of good and evil is just another phrase for egoism, right? When you take a particular, that's egoistic. And so when you live as a particular, that's egoistic living. And it comes from the use of your local mind for your existence, where you believe yourself to be your thoughts. You believe yourself. Yes.
I'm getting lost because we're supposed to, we're not supposed to, play with rattlesnakes. We have to discriminate. So I'm confusing discrimination with good and evil somehow.
Yeah, the discernment happens as, the discernment is what keeps us in non-egoistic space. It's what keeps our mind silent, really. Because your awareness becomes discernment when you observe the nature or the conditions of mind, the nature or conditions of your thinking, of your egoistic self. So you're stepping outside of the realm and you're watching the mind and you're watching the thoughts that are happening and you're watching the interactions of those things and you're not identifying with them. And your discernment is what prevents you from identifying with them. Your discernment is constantly trying to see things as they are, not determining a behavior, but to see things as they are, and then the behavior will manifest as it should, okay? So when you're discerning, you're not deciding whether or not to play with the snake, the rattlesnake. You're looking at the snake and recognizing it as a rattlesnake, right? And so you're observing it. You will then do the right thing. You're not going to say, oh, look, there's a rattlesnake. Let me go poke it in the nose. That's not the natural reaction to seeing a rattlesnake. So your discernment is, rattlesnake. Look at all the things the mind wants to do. You know, the mind wants to panic, it wants to run, it wants to freak out, it wants to kill the snake, all these different things. But your discernment doesn't follow into any of those categories. It's simply seeing the isness of the situation and leaving it to the universal mind to inspire the action in you. All right. So this notion of good and evil will not always exist for us. It's not a part of the one without a second, obviously, because it's two.
What does this have to do with Adam and Eve now? Can you circle back to that?
Sure. See, Adam and Eve initially were living in a world where there was no good and evil. They were living in paradise with the divine, where the divine will was. There was no counter to it. So there was no knowledge of an evil. Then when she moved into her senses, we'll say both of them because they both ended up eating that apple. So let's just keep it in that way in our mind. So when they both saw the beauty of the apple, which means that they moved into an awareness of their senses as a means of judgment or as a means of seeing rightly, they've moved into their senses. Then she says that the second thing that she said about that fruit of the knowledge of good and evil was that it looked like it would be good for food. All right. So first thing, she saw the beauty and got enticed, brought herself into the senses, judged the fruit according to her senses and not according to her knowledge, her innate knowledge as the self, that this fruit was forbidden. You know, instead of that, she was looking at it through the senses and judging it according to the senses. As she did that, the idea then occurs to her, this looks like it would be good for food. So again, she's judging its functionality according to her senses and not according to her divine knowledge, which is this fruit is forbidden. And so then her third and final delusion was that it would give her wisdom and make her like God. It would make her whole, right? So you see the pattern. This is what takes us out of the present moment within us. We see something beautiful, something that catches the glimmer of our senses. We leave our platform on the shore of the mind and we step into that moving notion, step into the world of change, you know, and we judge the thing according to our senses, according to its beauty or according to its attractiveness. And that leads to a second layer of thought. Now that we've left the platform of silence and moved into listening to our first thought, the second thought spins around. We catch it and say, oh, look, that looks like it would be something good to eat. You know, and a desire is formed. And a desire comes from the fact that you think that something outside of yourself is going to make you whole, is going to make you happier, more content, better, whatever. And that only happens after you leave the shore of the mind, the shore, the unchanging silence of your character, of your nature within. Step on that first thought of attractiveness, step on the second thought of need or desire, and then step on the third thought of ownership, making it yours. And that's the threefold step into delusion. From the platform of silence within into noisy mind and the world of change, those are the three steps that get us there. Hopefully at some point our discernment cuts in and we're like, oh my God, I almost took a bite of that fruit. Look what I've done. I'm not standing in the silence of my mind anymore. I'm standing on the beauty of the fruit and I'm contemplating its deliciousness. And I'm just about to desire to decide that I want it or need it or must have it to make me whole. And if we're able to have our discernment come in at that level, we can then just step off of thought one or thought two onto the platform of the silent mind, of our inner stillness, our unchanging nature, and keep going, keep living in the Garden of Eden, keep going on with no trouble. But if we stay obedient to the delusion, if we keep considering the world according to our thoughts and not according to the silence of the shrine within, that unchanging self, then we'll take a bite of that fruit. And he's telling us right here, he lists out actually what are the curses. You know, in Christianity they talk about curses, but really it's just what are the effects of eating the fruit of the changing world like that. Well, the fruit is fear, because the first thing you do is become hungry, right? You become small, you become something that's vulnerable. So the first fruit is fear, right? And then comes aversion. You start avoiding the things you fear, whatever they are, right? And then, it just kind of builds from there. And the more engaged in living in the relative you become, living in the mind, the world of change, getting your identity from the mind, getting your identity from the senses, getting your values and judgments from the senses, and not from the sense of wholeness that comes from the silent part of the self, the unchanging shrine within, then we lose our discernment, we lose our discrimination, we lose our ability to see things as they are, and we begin to see things and use things as we imagine them to be. And that, no offense, Maya, is Maya. That's what Maya is. When we start to judge the world on what we think it is, as opposed to what it is. And that's the same as looking as the fruit in the tree as the forbidden fruit. That's our whole self that knows. All right. Now it can only go so far with metaphors when you're talking in these terms, but take the point and leave the rest. So that looking at the fruit as forbidden and just leaving it as that, no, I don't need that. It's not going to add anything to my life. It's not going to fix anything. It's not to be desired. It is empty. If I leave that fruit there, then I continue in my stillness and my peace, in conformity or harmony with oneness, with the divine will, with big mind, as he's talking here. But if I don't do that, if I step into the world of the senses, start making my decisions and judgments accordingly, I'm in the world of change. And in the world of change, you cannot see things as they are. You can only see them as they appear in the dream. And you will suffer. And you will suffer first the sense of vulnerability and smallness. You'll realize you're naked. You'll suffer the fear. You'll suffer the aversion. You'll begin to see good things as bad, which is a real danger. And what am I saying there? Well, when God came walking in the garden in the cool of the day, instead of running to the beloved and showering him in hugs and kisses and flowers and wonderful dances and songs, what did they do? They ran and hid. And so this is part of the problem, because it begins to build an aversion toward recovering our nature. It makes us act in a way that actually drives us further into delusion, as opposed to surrendering and getting back on the shore of mind, getting out of the world of thought and change, coming back to the world of silent, sacred, holy, peaceful, harmonious, oneness, love, wisdom. We exit that world and we get caught up in the big world. Did I just add to the confusion, or was there an answer in there somewhere?
It was helpful. Thank you.
Okay. Very good. So before we were born, we had no feeling. We were one without a second. We were unchanging. In unchanging, there's no feeling. That doesn't mean you're numb. Numbness requires feeling to be numb toward. We're saying no feeling, because feeling requires two sides. It requires that sense which feels, and then it requires the stimulus, which is the feeling. So I'm just saying this just so that you don't get this idea, because you can hear somebody say, I'm without feeling, you think that they don't care about anybody. That's not the no feeling he's talking about. The no feeling here is beyond that. It means there's love and love alone, right? There's no opportunity for no love, which would create your feeling. So we were born, we had no feeling, we were one with the universe. This is called mind only, or essence of mind, or big mind, right? So mind only, when he says mind only, he's not talking about the changing mind, right? He's talking about the pure mind. And Ramakrishna teaches us that the pure mind and the divine, pure mind and God, pure mind and Brahman, are the same thing. So that's why he says this essence of, or mind only, or essence of mind. Essence of mind is pure mind. Again, just another way of looking at it, another way of saying it, or big mind. And this again is his third perspective on the same idea. big mind is the mind that contains everything, the mind that holds the entirety in it. After we are separated by birth from this oneness, now this is interesting because we're not necessarily separated at birth from this oneness. I say that because Thakur says that there are those ever-free souls that take a birth, but are always just one scratch away from knowing their oneness, one scratch away from knowing their true nature. So it's not really the birth. Again, it's our egoism, our sense of ego, that creates our separation. When we say we're separate and apart from the whole, then we become separate and apart from the whole. And the universe begins to berate us, trying to get us to go back to the truth. All right, after we are separated by birth from this oneness, as the water falling from the waterfall is separated by the wind and rocks, then we have feeling, right? Because then we have the two sides. You have difficulty because you have feeling, right? Because of this separation, because of your idea of being other than the rest, you have feeling. You have something to plug your senses into. You attach to the feeling you have without knowing just how this kind of feeling is created. Yeah, well, it was created because of delusion. So that's where your discernment steps in. If your discernment catches it at that point, it's almost effortless to get back. No problem at all. But when you spend a whole 50 years exploring that difference and maintaining and developing and perfecting your love of yourself separate from the whole, then you've got you seemingly have a lot of work to do. You've got a lot of bad habits to go against, you've got to trace those steps backwards to where you came from. Fortunately, the sages say we can just cut it off, just stop the mind, and you don't have to untangle it, right? Just cut the strings. There's no untangling necessary. But if you want to untangle, you can do it that way also. It just takes longer. No worries. That's really the path of jnana. Path of jnana is to untangle the marionette strings that are controlling you, to figure out where they're coming from, where they're going. Whereas, bhakti is kind of just ignoring them, just kind of clipping them, and focusing on the one who's controlling the strings, or whatever. I don't know, my metaphors are falling apart there. I've cut the strings too early. So anyway, you attach to the feeling you have without knowing just how this kind of feeling is created, and that happens with lack of discernment. When you do not realize, when you do not realize that you are one with the river or one with the universe, you have fear, right? You have fear, and that's what leads us into anxiety. That's what leads us into worry. That's what leads us into kind of a desperate sort of living. Whether it is separated into drops or not, water is water. So that's knowing your nature. Yes, I have a body that seems to be separate, but it's the body of a man within a dream. So it's not a material body. It's still a body made of mind. And that body made of mind is the same as the tree made of mind, and is at one with the other bodies made of mind within the dream. So when you come to the knowledge that it's the nature of this experience is dream, and the essence of the dreamer is what we are, which unifies everything in the dream, then we lose our fear, because we know the dream can't harm us, because we are the container of the dream. We are not the actor in the dream, right? When you realize that you are one with the river or one with the universe, when you do not realize, then you have fear. Whether it is separated into drops or not, water is water. Our life and death are the same thing. When we realize this fact, we have no fear of death anymore, and we have no actual difficulty in our life. All right, things are in perspective. You understand your immortal nature. So what is death? You understand that you're the sleeper in the bed and not the panicking soldier in the dream. And so by knowing that doesn't mean you stop being a soldier in the dream. You probably still go on being a soldier in the dream, but you know that you're not a soldier that can be killed. You know You know the context, you know the essence of what seems to be an experience in the dream. But as you unpackage it, as you open to it, as you surrender to it, you come to realize, wow, not only is all of this of one mind, but that one mind is of my highest self. There is nothing to fear here because I cannot die here. I cannot be born here. Right? My essence is from another level of consciousness. My truth is at another level of consciousness. And you go on with the dream, unafraid of what's happening, unconcerned, though you may play along. When the water returns to its original oneness with the river, it no longer has any individual feeling to it. It resumes its own nature and finds composure. How very glad the water must be to come back to the original river. If this is so, what feeling will we have when we die? I think we are like the water in the dipper. We will have composure then, perfect composure. What is it to have perfect composure? It is to be unmoving, to be unchanging. So we return at death, we return to the shore of mind. We return to that silence of the unchanging self within, that at the point of death, we become one with the river again. And so there's that sense of relief, that sense of rest, that sense of unity. And then what happens after that, who knows? You may get restless and decide you want to be a beautiful woman again, or a handsome man, or an ugly one, who knows? But you decide that you want to do something on your own, of your own, for your own, and you eat that food again. You take another bite of that knowledge of good and evil, and you're whisked off right where we are. So you get to reread this book again, maybe in Italian next time, or all right. We come to our perfect composure. It may be too perfect for us just now, just because we are so much attached to our own feeling. That was exactly what I was thinking when I was saying that. Perfection isn't what we want. That's what makes this a play. That's what makes this hilarious. Is that Mother says, she tells us bald face, she tells us right to our face. She says, look here, you can have your realization this very moment. It's all yours. There's nothing. There is nothing here in this entire universe that's going to deny you your realization right now. Nothing. So who's doing it? You. Perfection is available to you, but you're having an awfully good time being imperfect. So you're going to stick with that, right? It's like playing, what's that? Let's Make a Deal. Another reference, but you grow up watching that. The only reason I watched Let's Make a Deal was because it was between Tom and Jerry and the Flintstones on TV in the afternoon. So you watch Let's Make a Deal, and God offers you, look at this great life you've got going on here. You get your nice little room, walk in the mountains. You get to get up in the morning and have your morning routine, and you're like, yeah, I like this. Discipline? Nah, I don't really want any discipline, thanks. And so we actually enjoy our error. We enjoy our imperfect life. We like the stimulation of the senses. We enjoy our pleasures. And because we enjoy our pleasures, we're willing to put up with our pain to a certain extent. As long as it stays relatively in balance, we're all right with it. We're going to hang on with the familiar. No, I don't want behind what's door number 2. I'll take the donkey from door number 1, and we'll just stick with that because I know what it is, right? So this is our trouble. And this, Regina, is where our discernment steps in, where we try and understand, why am I so stupid? Why? It's when you get home with your donkey from door number 1. You bring it into the living room and you're like, what in the world was I thinking? anything in door number 2 would have been better than having a donkey, you know. And this is what we want to save ourselves from on our deathbed, right? Because deathbed is when the donkey comes home. and you're laying there on the deathbed with the donkey right next to you, and you're like, why did I live a life that put everything I wanted on this side of the fence? And now I'm in a situation where I have to go to the other side of the fence and I can't bring anything with me, not even the donkey. You know, so what do you do? So this is what spiritual life is about. It's accepting responsibility for the fact that you are deluded because you want to be deluded. It's accepting that fact. And then it's sitting there and thinking, how can this be true? It's obviously insane for me to want to be deluded. It's insane for me to want to live in ignorance. Why am I doing this? And then the discernment begins. And then you learn, but I have the truth within me. My essence, my nature is truth. My essence, my nature is what I'm looking for. Let me stand in that quiet place and just listen, because all the decisions I make seem to take me into delusion, keep getting me in trouble. So let me stop. Let me stop this egoistic world building, you know, where I determine my everyday, and let me come down to this moment, to the essence of this moment, my isness, my wisdom, my love. Let me sit in this isness, and let me take each moment as it comes, as it presents itself. And I'm not going to think about it in egoistic mind. I'm not going to use my relative castle of thought to determine the truth of this moment. I'm going to let it be, and I'm going to accept it as it is. I'm not going to try and change it. I'm going to accept it as it is. And in that acceptance, I'm going to love it as it is. I'm going to lean into it. And this is how I will live my life. And that is surrender. That's surrender to the divine will. And that surrender is what leads to harmony. And what gives us access, as it were, to realization. All right. So how very glad the water must be to come back to the original river. So very good. We will have composure then, perfect composure. It may be too perfect for us just now, because we are so much attached to our own feeling and to our individual existence. For us, just now, we have some fear of death, but after we resume our true original nature, there is nirvana. That is why we say to attain nirvana is to pass away. To pass away is not a very adequate expression. Perhaps to pass on, or to go on, or to join would be better. You will try to find some better. Will you try to find some better expression for death? When you find it, you will have quite a new interpretation of your life. It will be like my experience when I saw the water in the big waterfall. Imagine, it was 1,340 feet high. Any thoughts so far? Concerns? Confusions?
Yeah, I've got one thought. I don't want to get sidetracked or anything, but I spent a little bit of time in Japan, and Japan kind of makes it easy for people to reach consensus and hang together and be kind of unified. So if you've been on trips with Japanese people, Japanese groups, they move together and think as a group. And it makes it a little bit easier to be less of a particular thing.
Right. Yeah, well, that's you know, they're pretty much the ones that matured Buddhism. I'm not going to take that away from any other country, but the Japanese definitely, they're the foundation of their country, the foundation of their culture is this idea of oneness. You know, very much like we have the Christian background for everything that we do. Well, maybe sort of. Never mind. That's probably not true in any sense. But anyway, the way that we think about Christianity being our center here, and the way they think about Buddhism being their center, quite different. I think it has a very different effect. Because you see in the Eastern cultures, that thought of the whole is much more important than the thought of the individual. You know,
Right.
that
And
that
in
the,
their, even in their business dealings, they can continuously reach consensus. You don't leave anybody out. And
right.
it's kind of, they kind of work, it underlies their culture.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, that's why everybody, when they, you know, when they have these little epidemics of the flu and whatnot in their cities, you'll see everybody just naturally run around with their mask on, you know, not to make a political point, but just another point. Because the well-being of the whole in that culture outweighs the desire for expression of the individual, you know. And yeah, it's a very different way of thinking for us. You know, I think for an American in that culture, we would think, God, this culture is tyrannical.
It's fun though. I mean, if you go along with them, you can just enjoy
Yeah.
it.
Yes, most of I'd like to hear more about that actually at some point, because I've heard about it, I've read about it in places. Even when I was there a little bit, like I remember in Tokyo, I got up very early one morning to take a walk, and down on the main street with all the little businesses, all these business owners were out front of their businesses with scrub brushes and buckets, cleaning off the sidewalks. And I was like, wow, that's incredible. You know, when I grew up in Germany, on Saturday night, everybody would be out sweeping the sidewalks in front of their house so that people walking to church in their good clothes and the next morning wouldn't be walking through dirty sidewalks. That was the reason that we did that. And so you see these beautiful things that are born out of that idea of oneness, born out of the idea of what he's talking about here exactly, that this respect for one another is natural to us. This worship of one another in love is natural to us. That's why it's beautiful. That's why I can tell the story of sweeping sidewalks and you think, oh, that's a really nice thing. Wow, that's cool. You know, it's because it's your nature. Things that are in harmony with your nature are what are beautiful to you. That's what
Don't you
Vivekananda.
think, good morning, it's Angela. Don't you think that that's more, I'm gonna disagree with you a little bit. Don't you think that that's more of the respectful attitude for oneself? Because Japanese people, I've spent much time there over many years. They have a lot of respect for themselves. It's not so much a group. It is definitely the group thing, but they have so much respect for themselves that they naturally respect others. And I find it very interesting that you said the thing about they refine Buddhism, but you know, it's really a Shinto country, almost
Right.
like 99%. And of course the Buddhism it goes really dovetails with it. But
Right.
the self-respect is, I think, is the thing. And we in this country, we're not very respectful of others because we really don't have a lot of respect for ourselves, actually. And that's a shame, but maybe that'll change.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea. I don't think we're in disagreement. And I really appreciate you coming forward like that. I would say that you're absolutely right in the idea of respecting ourselves. But I also believe that there's a different idea of self also. You know, an egoistic self sees itself as separate and apart from a whole. I don't think that an integrated self has a deep respect for itself, and so its respect for others is the same as its respect for itself. You know, that the expression of its respect for itself is naturally respect for others. In an egoistic world, you know, a world of independence, a world where I am separate and apart from the whole, a world where I take care of number one first, respecting yourself can be done at the expense of others and not be necessarily wrong within that context. You know, within that context, me taking care of myself is the capitalistic thing to do. You know, me when I get on the plane and I take the oxygen mask and put it on myself before I put it on the child, that's fine. You know, the ideal is put it on everybody at the same time. But I hear what you're saying, but I do think that the sense of self is different in this experience, because he's saying,
yeah, in Japan, it's often a problem for people to find out, to determine who they are, who their so-called self is.
Yes. Yeah, because it is so tied. And so I think that this is what he's pointing at here for us, is to see ourselves. And Swami Prabhupada said this, I've shared this before, when I confronted him when I first joined the monastery, because it occurred to me one morning in my wonderful meditation that Vedanta was selfish. And so I went to confront him about it at the breakfast table. Maharaj, I think Vedanta is selfish. And of course, I wanted him to tell me I was wrong and, correct me on it, because here I was in a Vedanta monastery. But he didn't. He says, yes, you're right. He says, Vedanta is selfish. He says, so your task in Vedanta is not to become unselfish. Your task in Vedanta is to increase your sense of self to include everybody. So to grow, to expand your sense of self, to include everyone, so that serving everyone is serving yourself. So that there's that notion. It's changing our idea of who we are, that we are not an island. We are a continent of people, that we are not separate. And so by honoring you, I honor me. And I think that's kind of what he's pointing at here, is an expansion of the idea of ourself, not a change in behavior. That's not the important thing. The important thing is not the behavior. The important thing is seeing the essence of self, so that then our behavior transforms accordingly. Our behavior stays authentic. That's important. We want our behavior to stay authentic. If we think ourselves to be small and individualistic, it's important to be in line with that, because when we understand the nature of ourselves, then our behaviors will change of their own accord. And that's natural growth. That's organic growth. That's healthy growth. Mimicry, or changing the behaviors without changing the understanding, that mimicry is shallow, and it won't take us very far. It will make us wonderful churchgoers where we're very friendly to everybody, but we're not concerned about anybody. That's the difference. So we have to change our sense of self, and then have the behaviors transform accordingly. And that will be organic. Don't just change your behaviors thinking you fixed it, because there's something that was behind those behaviors that still hasn't changed. So this is why we practice. This is why we try and sit in the presence of the divine. That's what awareness is. All right. We say everything comes out of emptiness. One whole river or one whole mind is emptiness. When we reach this understanding, we find the true meaning of our life. When we reach this understanding, we can see the beauty of human life. Before we realize this fact, everything that we see is just delusion. Sometimes we overestimate the beauty. Sometimes we underestimate or ignore the beauty, because our small mind is not in accord with reality, right? So that's what we were talking about. When you step off out of the unchanging silence of the self, which is constantly being intuitively inspired to right action by the big mind, by universal mind, by the sense of us being one with everything around us. When we step off of that platform, which is maintained in silence, which interestingly enough, Ili Chiaro equates that silence with eternity, and equates that silence with oneness, and equates that silence, with truth. That is where all of this stuff becomes apparent to us, becomes real to us. We see the world finally as it is, not as our mind is telling us it is. And so he's really, really drawing this thing at home here. So we want to return to the emptiness. What is the emptiness? Well, of course, it's the one without a second. Why do they call it emptiness? Because there's nothing there to grasp, nothing there to grab, nothing to be identified with. It is a wholeness. It's a completeness. And there's no analysis going on about it. It's accepted in its wholeness. It's The awareness, it's awareness, because awareness can't be divided. Awareness is the whole. And so that whole, from that perspective, is emptiness. We can call it fullness just as legitimately. But if we call it fullness, there's something there to grab, something there to have or attain. And that's what we're trying to avoid. We don't want anything outside of ourself to be required for our fullness. So that's why we're calling it emptiness. You are your own fullness. You are in need of nothing in this moment. To talk about it this way is quite easy, but to have the actual feeling, not so easy. But by your practice of Zazen, you can cultivate this feeling by continually returning to it. When it becomes a habit, like, even my trying to pay more attention to it in the last 3 or 4 days has really helped me so much in not getting caught up in a lot of stuff I was getting caught up in, because I just realize almost as soon as it happens, that I'm getting caught up. And I'll say, hey, step off this escalator, get back down here to this quiet zone. And you return to that and you say your Om a few times in a row. You breathe into your body a few times in a row. You let go of all your judgments, decisions, and perspectives as they appear. And then you're back in business. By your practice of Zazen, you can cultivate this feeling. When you can sit with your whole body and mind, and with the oneness of your mind and body under the control of the universal mind, not the control of your localized mind, where all this thinking and changing is happening all the time, but where you are controlled, which again, this is that spiritual paradigm all the time, a paradox that we run into. It's not a matter when you stand here and you move. It's not a matter of doership. It's a matter of surrender, right? Okay. You're not doing this to grab and have and get and change something. You're doing this because your nature is to do it. And so it is done. So something is happening, but you are not doing. That's the sensation of living in big mind, big mind. And one of the things I returned to, I think it was Chiaro again, that was saying that divine, he says, you want to know sort of what it's like? He says, do this with your finger. That's big mind. Big mind is moving your finger right now. Now, how do you determine the difference? Well, you don't know the cause and effect that is moving your finger right now. You don't know how it's happening. You don't know any of the mechanics involved in it. You're just the idea move, the finger comes and the finger is moving. So it's not a knowledge that's referential, where you have to go grab a few facts, remember a process, think about, okay, all right. So I don't even know how I would describe it. What's the first thing that has to happen to get that finger over there to change when I'm over here? I don't know, but it obeys and it goes, and that's accepted. So living in big mind is like that. It's not a referential knowledge where you have to sit there and think, oh God, how am I supposed to respond to this situation? Let me think. Well, he was really rude to me, but he was really nice to me yesterday. And you know what? He owes me $25. And if I get too mean, I'm not going to get that $25. See, that's living in referential mind. That's human knowledge. That's the distinction Ramakrishna was making with M at the beginning. When he said, oh, my wife is a little ignorant. He said, oh, and you're a man of knowledge, are you? He's drawing that distinction. The knowledge of mind of the changing world is not what we're looking for. We're looking for a direct connect, where it's not referential. It's just isness. And in that isness of the pure mind, you will never make a mistake. You will always act from love. And acting from love will always get you there. Where? Here. Your everyday life will be renewed without being attached to an old erroneous interpretation of life, without being attached to an old ego, right? An old way of thinking that's rusty, that's built upon a whole stack of whys. I'm this way because. And that because is even a delusion, because we can't even remember all the becauses. We just act this way because we've been acting this way for a long time. And it's just easier to stay an old crotchety fool than it is to be renewed and fresh in the moment as a lover of all, a lover of the divine. So stop it. When you realize this fact, you will discover how meaningless your old interpretation was. You will discover how meaningless your old ego is. Meaningless. And how much useless effort you have been making, right? Building ego is a useless effort. And that is mostly what we do when we're in a deluded mind. Constantly constructing ego, constantly constructing reasons that say, yes, I am a great person. Yes, I am powerful. Yes, I am loved. You know, yes, I'm immortal and I'm beautiful and I'm strong and I'm secure. And I have all of the Mercedes and houses and children and wives and business acumen to prove it to you. You know, I was just reading a tweet from this guy, Andrew Tate, who's in prison in Hungary or something right now. And, you know, he writes to this one guy and he's like, you're poor, you're weak, you're unaccomplished, blah, 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 blah. And the guy writes back this beautiful tweet. He says, yes, I'm poor because my job is to serve handicapped people. He says, but I'm deeply loved by the people that I serve. I don't want their money. He says, yes, you know, I he admits all the stuff that Andrew Tate says, but he doesn't see any of it as being weakness because he's coming from a place of love. He's coming from a place, you know, he's like, yes, it's, you know, my wife isn't the most beautiful. She's not a glamour queen, you know, but she loves me and I love her very much. And she is a wonderful addition to my life. And he just goes through each one of these things. You know, when Andrew Tate speaks, he's speaking from that ego self, and it's so judgmental and so divisive and so condescending and so hurtful. That's how you can know. And that's that's hopefully enough to wake up your discernment. When you come from an ego space, no matter how it's dressed up, no matter how many jewels you've put on that thing, it's going to be selfish. It's going to be self-centered. Its act of love is going to produce resentment at some level for some reason, right? It's only when we come from universal mind, only when you come from that stillness of love within, that presence of God, the presence of the beloved, it's only when you're inspired from that movement that you won't ultimately be mean, that you won't ultimately be selfish, right? And so he's making this distinction. You will find the true meaning of life. The true meaning of life is expression. It's expression of what? Of the noun of God, love, wisdom, eternity, existence. All right. You will find the true meaning of life. And even though you have difficulty falling upright from the top of the waterfall to the bottom of the mountain, you will enjoy your life. You'll enjoy the fall, which is the true surrender, you know, the true surrender. So, all of that to say, be fully present. Be here now. And remember that what is this now? The nature of this now is love. The nature of this now is wisdom. And the presence of the now, the isness of now, is your beloved. So stay in that company. Diminish the walls that you've put up to protect yourself that have become your prison. Meet this moment new and fresh without any idea about it, and be inspired from within on what to do with it. All right. Any questions? Comments? Beautiful silence. All right. Well, we'll see you this evening if you're there. Otherwise, the next time we meet.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
Thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank
Indeed.
you.
Take care, Jaima.